Hello, and welcome to another episode of Mad Scientist Brewing Beer Education Series. This series has gone into a lot of details about beer styles, ingredients, and proper handling, but hasn't yet gone through the actual process from which beer is made. Depending on the style of beer, this can take as little as a few weeks to several years, but the process is mostly the same for all beers. There are variations that are style dependent, such as mashing methods, lagering, and barrel aging, but this video is going to look at the broader steps from going from grain to glass. Brewing beer starts off with milling the grain that is going to be used. Remember that for yeast to ferment beer, it needs sugars, which are converted from starches in the grain that must first be exposed. Milling cracks open the grains and pulverizes the starch-filled endosperm, while leaving the husks as intact as possible. The degree of grain crush will have an impact on how much extract can be taken from the grain. Too coarse, and the efficiency of the process will suffer, but too fine, and there will be issues with filtering the beer in the latter stage. Many breweries have grain mills set up to crush malt and add it directly to their mash tun, while others buy pre-crushed grains. The next step in the process is mashing, in which the crushed grains are steeped in hot water. The water is first heated in a large tank called the hot liquor tank, and is added to the mash tun, where the grain will be mixed into it. The temperature of the water will affect the mash temperature, which in turn affects the performance of enzymes from the malt. These enzymes work best at different temperature and pH ranges, and brewers can control the fermentability of their wort by controlling these parameters. During the mash step, the enzymes will break down starch from the malt and convert them into both fermentable and unfermentable sugars, which will be available to the yeast and affect the final alcohol content and body of the beer. Generally, lower mash temperatures lead to a more alcoholic, drier, lighter-bodied beer, while higher mash temperatures lead to a less alcoholic, sweeter, heavier-bodied beer. This step is one of the most crucial opportunities for a brewer to affect the outcome of the beer to match a certain style profile. Several methods of mashing are available, including single infusion, which is conducted at one temperature, step mashing, in which the temperature is raised in various steps, or decoction mashing, which was covered in a previous video. After the mashing step comes lautering. This step removes the sugar-containing liquid, now called wort, from the grains and moves it into the boil kettle. Many breweries combine mash and lauter steps in the same vessel, while others utilize a separate lauter tun in which the grains and wort are transferred into. In the combination mash-lauter tun, the wort is first recirculated in the tun in a process called vorlaughing. This process helps to settle the grain bed and begin filtering the wort through it, such that at the end of the vorlaugh process, the wort is mostly clear. Next, the wort is pumped into the boil kettle. From here, depending on the style of brewing, the lauter step can be done, or more commonly, the grains are rinsed with more hot water to further extract the remaining sugars. This is called sparging. The hot water, which is usually around 170 degrees Fahrenheit, stops the enzymes from working and fixes the composition of the wort. An old technique called partaguile brewing made separate beers of further decreasing strength after each subsequent sparge step. But the common method explained here combines all of the wort fractions into a single batch of beer. There are two common lautering practices: continuous or fly sparging and batch sparging. With continuous sparging, hot water is slowly trickled over the spent grain to draw out the remaining sugars, and this wort is collected until the final desired boil volume is obtained. With batch sparging, a large amount of hot water is added all at once, and after the grain bed is reset by another vorlaugh, the wort is drained into the kettle. Continuous sparging will provide better efficiency, but take longer than the batch sparge. In all cases, it's important not to oversparge and draw wort with too high of a pH, which will add astringent tannins into the wort. After all the wort is collected in the boil kettle, it's time for the boil stage. Boiling is an important step in beer production because it helps precipitate out unnecessary proteins, sterilizes the wort, drives away volatile off flavors, concentrates the wort, and is required for extracting bitterness from hops. Hops are added at different points of the boil stage depending on their desired use by the brewer. Added early, and they will contribute to the beer's bitterness. Added during the middle, and they will contribute more towards hop flavor, and added towards the end or after the boil, they will contribute to hop aroma. The boil step typically lasts 60 to 90 minutes, and rarely longer than 120 minutes. When the boil is complete, the wort needs to be cooled down. Before this, brewers will perform what's called a whirlpool, where the hot wort is pumped tangentially to create a whirlpool in the kettle that collects all of the hops and other flocculated materials into a neat cone at the bottom, so that clear beer can be transferred out. Some brewers may also add hops during this stage in order to draw out further hop aroma and flavor. After the whirlpool, the beer passes through a heat exchanger, which cools it down to fermentation temperature. Oftentimes, the hot water that is produced through the heat exchanger is recycled for cleaning or added to the hot liquor tank to brew a follow-up batch. Once the wort is cooled, it needs to be aerated so the yeast has enough oxygen to propagate, and it is then pumped into a fermenter. Fermenters come in different shapes and sizes, which have been dictated by brewing traditions of the country. They can be stone, wood, steel, open-topped, closed, square, cylindroconical, and all of these are still used today, and they can have not so subtle effects on fermentation. Once in a fermenter, yeast is added, and the fermentation begins. The yeast go to work populating themselves first by consuming the oxygen, and then multiplying and consuming the sugars and turning those into alcohol and carbon dioxide. And within a week or so, the primary fermentation is complete. The yeast still needs time to clean up fermentation byproducts, which is called the secondary fermentation, so the beer is kept on the yeast to condition for a little while longer. From here, the beer can be transferred to other tanks to condition. It can be kegged directly, canned or bottled, or for cask ale, it can be added to kegs and shipped, still fermenting, to pubs. Some beers are added to barrels to draw out flavors or to condition with bacteria and wild yeast, as is in the case with lambic and other Belgian sour beers. The finishing step of the beer dictates how long it will take to reach the consumer, which can be anywhere from a couple of days after fermentation is done for very fresh beers to over 3 years for some of the blended guzes. That more or less covers the process of getting beer from grain to glass. It is a very brief description. There's obviously a lot more detail that I can go into, but I like to keep these videos fairly short. There are a lot of resources that I can think of to go to, and not just these videos, certainly following up on some of the Cicerone videos or reading up on the Brewers Association, How to Brew by John Palmer are all great resources for learning all these individual steps, or just talking to your local brewer if you can, if you're more interested in learning about some of the in-depth parts of the process. That's all I've got for today, so until next time, cheers.